Tribe, but which Indian tribe, rather, in Minnesota has signed more treaties with the United States than any other? It is probably a tribe that you have never heard of, the Sandy Lake Band of Ojibwe. But that tribe doesn't legally exist anymore. The federal government says it's part of the Mille Lacs Band. But a few descendants of the Sandy Lake Band are trying to reestablish their tribe, and that has prompted one of the more unusual political alliances ever seen at the state capitol.
And this place here has a lot of history. This is where we come from.
The Skinnaways family's roots run deep along the shore of Big Sandy Lake. They trace their lineage back to the early 1800s to Chief Hole in the Day. But in the eyes of the federal government, the Sandy Lake Band of Ojibwe is no more.
There's a wrong here. We would like to right a historic wrong. With the Sandy Lake Band has a history. It shouldn't be hidden or terminated.
Sandy Skinnaway is carrying on the battle her father began almost 20 years ago. Clifford Skinnaway tried to get the Bureau of Indian Affairs to recognize Sandy Lake as a tribe. The historical record is clear up to a point. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has a census of the band from 1854. During the 1800s, Sandy Lake chiefs signed 10 treaties with the U.S. government.
The Treaty of 1855 established reservations at Mille Lacs, where Mille Lacs is right now, Mille Lacs Indian Reservation. And then they established the Sandy Lake Indian Reservation, which of course is right here. We're standing at our house is where the treaty is.
Chief Hole in the Day II met with President Andrew Johnson at the White House, and even as late as 1915, the federal government had dealings with the people of Sandy Lake.
Executive Order number 2144 was signed by President Woodrow Wilson on March 4th, 1915.
That executive order added another 32 acres of reservation land for the Sandy Lake people. But 19 years later, Congress passed the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, and that is when the historical record becomes less than clear. Indians across the country were asked to vote and organize into tribes, and Mille Lacs Band officials say that is when the Sandy Lake people joined their band.
Sandy Lake was combined with Mille Lacs, and that was a document that was voted on by the members at Sandy Lake. It was a document that was approved by the Secretary of Interior, and that's how they became a part of the Mille Lacs Band.
Mille Lacs is more than 60 miles away from Sandy Lake. Skinnaway argues there was no reason for Sandy Lake to join the Mille Lacs Band. She says her people did not vote to join Mille Lacs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs just assumed that was the case.
This was done without any kind of documentation. This was done without a court ruling. This was done without a congressional action. It was just done on paper. Well, I think Sandy Lake should be put under the jurisdiction of another tribe, and we'll name it the Mille Lacs tribe, Mille Lacs Reservation. And when that happened, our identity was lost.
Skinnaway is angry at the Mille Lacs Band. She says it's fighting recognition for Sandy Lake. The Mille Lacs Band's Jim Genia says the band has tried to remain neutral on the matter, but clearly he's not happy with what's happening at the state capitol.
They have made a strong case that their rights are being infringed upon.
State Senator Dan Stevens is sponsoring a bill that would have the state recognize Sandy Lake as a separate tribe. Stevens knows only the federal government can do that, but he says his bill would pressure the federal government to do the right thing.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs in the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act just decided to roll in the Big Sandy Band with the Mille Lacs Band, and without any due process made it an administrative decision.
Dan Stevens has about as much compassion for Indian people as George Armstrong Custer.
Jim Genia says anti-Indian lawmakers are using the Sandy Lake controversy to stick it to his tribe. That bill seems to have created some strange political bedfellows.
I would say it's created the strangest or the strangest bedfellows since Lisa Marie Presley and Michael Jackson. Seeing Dan Stevens and Bob Lassard, both Minnesota senators, sponsoring legislation to recognize the Sandy Lake Band is one of the most ironic things that I've seen happen in recent years on the state level.
Stevens says there's no ulterior motive, and he's frustrated that so far, few of his fellow lawmakers will look at the bill.
They haven't looked at the historical facts on the Big Sandy Band. And if they would look at the facts and see what I'm trying to do with this bill, I think they would see very quickly and very clearly that it's not to stick it to anybody, it's to help these people out who have a clear violation of their civil rights.
I can tell you that what will happen if Sandy Lake is recognized as a separate band is two things for sure. One is that they'll want to get their own casino, and the second is that they'll pursue some form of treaty rights. And to see Dan Stevens, who was so opposed to the Mille Lacs Band's treaty rights claims and who has been an opponent of tribes operating casinos, sponsoring legislation that could ultimately result in this is pretty ironic.
On the shores of Big Sandy Lake, where her father is buried, Sandy Skinaway says she has no plans of building a casino or of giving up.
And I've seen homeless people and people who didn't have nowhere to go. And I was always taken to the thought that I always have a home to come back to. And Sandy Lake is home. And of course, I could have lived elsewhere, but I came back home because this is where I'm from and this is where my roots are.
Sandy's father died in 1994. Clifford Skinaway spent the last 15 years of his life trying to get the Sandy Lake tribe recognized. Monroe Skinaway believes that his brother's work was not in vain.
We were the chief signatories to all the treaties in Minnesota. We signed 10 treaties as opposed to other bands that signed 1 or 2. They're trying to make us disappear. We're still here. My niece Sandy is kind of a thorn in their side, as, say, my brother was. And hopefully the struggle will continue on. If this does not materialize in my time or Sandy's time, we have our children here. We'll continue on the struggle. So we're not going to go away.
Mille Lacs Band officials believe that it's mostly just one family, the Skinaways, who want to reestablish Sandy Lake as a separate tribe. The Skinaways argue that several hundred people would reclaim their heritage if they had the chance. Around the country, other Native Americans are also applying for federal recognition. The Bureau of Indian Affairs recently ruled on 4 petitions for recognition. The BIA approved 2 of them. Next up, bird art. But first, if you want to volunteer time or money for the flood, or if your home or business has been damaged,